back to the Win Again Clubroom. My name is Mark Moyer. I am thrilled that you're all here, and I'm super excited to have Vance Johnson here. And when I first met Vance and I heard his story, I was completely, really amazed and shocked and heartbroken and thrilled and happy, and everything all into one. And I did go out, and the minute I knew that Vance would be appearing, I went on to this brand new, really small website called Amazon.com, and I purchased his book, Uncovered. I highly recommend it. I read every single word in here. A fantastic book that really outlines his journey and the 12 steps it took to get through that journey. And Shirley Jump, our fantastic Win Again member, was the author and helped really structure a lot of this. And as you all know, she's New York Times bestselling author, Shirley Jump. Also, I just got word a few minutes ago that the Kindle version is now, right this minute, live on Amazon. So please, I encourage everybody, and we'll throw up an Amazon link for this book in a few minutes, but I encourage everybody to grab a copy of this because it's really a page turner in terms of how you'll see everything evolve through Vance's life. But before I go into much more of that, I do want to bring Vance in a minute, but first, just a couple quick words about him. He was born in New Jersey, but at a very young age moved out to Arizona, and this is where he grew up, was raised, and so forth. But he once he graduated high school, and I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff on purpose, he attended the University of Arizona. He was, he played football there, and he was an incredible star. He was a receiver. He was a running back. He was a punt returner. He was a kickoff returner. When he wasn't doing that, he was a cheerleader, got the water, fixed the meals. He did everything for that team, crushed it over there. The Denver Broncos appreciated that. They drafted him, and he spent his entire career with the Denver Broncos from 1985 to 1995, 11 seasons. He was a three-time Super Bowl. I appeared three times in the Super Bowl. In fact, I didn't even mention this to him yet, but I was there to see him in Pasadena for the Super Bowl back in 1987. New York Giants versus the Denver Broncos. It was an amazing day for me because my Giants won. I'm sorry about that, Vance. Anyways, but he was also a member of what they call the Three Amigos, which he coined back in, I think it was back in 87 or so. And it was really talking about I'm sorry, not 87, but talking about, maybe it was 87, but the three wide receivers, along with Ricky Nattiel and Mark Jackson. Those were all the fantastic highlights, and the football career. He had an amazing career and so forth. But there was a lot of other things that mixed into that. And I'm going to bring in Vance right now because, we're going to dive right in with a lot of the stuff that Vance went through. And then I'm going to bring him in, and then I'm going to share a video with you in 1 second here that really chronicles a lot of his, the initial part of it. So hello, Vance. Say hello to everybody first.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. And so you reminded me, is this the one you were at?
It might have been.
Yeah.
No, not San Diego. No, not San Diego. No, I was in the Pasadena. 19.
You said 80. You said 87, and this is the 87 Super Bowl that I played in. Yeah, that's the 87 Super Bowl.
No, that says 88 on it. January of 88. I was talking about January of 87.
Oh, I'm sorry. The playoffs were in 87. I apologize. Playoffs were in 87. The Super Bowl was in 88.
And I got an amazing story about that Pasadena one where I didn't have a ticket and I was trying to find one. And long story short, I managed to get in at halftime.
I was kidding.
All right, there it is.
That's cool. Right there. I was trying to fool you.
I'm not always so easily fooled. Most of the time, but not always. So now I'm going to try to do this here where I'm going to share a video with everybody now.
Denver has acquired this pick from Houston and has selected Vance Johnson, wide receiver, Arizona.
It's very rare that you see a wide receiver with the rare speed, the 4.4 speed. Zim mentioned 4.28, which was accurate, by the way. So I think Vance Johnson will fit in very well with Denver. It's a position that they needed to fill.
Vance Johnson, what a catch.
Winder is in as Elway rose to the right. Leaping catch by Vance Johnson for a touchdown.
The second-round draft pick quickly made an impact.
Vance Johnson kicked in the speed.
Using his greatest asset to become one of John Elway's top targets.
That's a fine catch. Good throw, but a great catch by Vance Johnson.
The ability to elude defenders and his quick-witted persona helped Johnson win the hearts of Denver fans.
Quick-witted persona. You're muted, by the way. Unmute yourself for a second. There you go. We're talking about you? Quick-witted persona, huh? I like that.
Yeah, I always throw that highlight in there, guys, because I travel around the country sharing my testimony. And sometimes people see me and they say, you look kind of small. You sure you played in the NFL? And I always say, yeah. And they say, what position? I say, wide receiver. And then they say, you're too short. I say, here, let me prove to you that it was me. And so then I put the highlights on real quick so that I can prove that it was me. Now, I had long hair back then, but my coach made me cut it off.
Why?
Well, back then, actually, Dan Reeves was my coach. And you know how the guys have ponytails these days? I had really long ponytails, but I would get tackled by my ponytails. And so Dan Reeves made me cut my ponytails off back then. And then I started losing my hair on the top. So I said, okay, I'll just go bald.
Gotcha. Well, look, I want to jump into some of the topics that you and I talked about before, because this is as I mentioned, a really compelling book, and it really, you touch almost like barely on your football accomplishments, because that's really what this is about. I mean, you had when you talk to football fans, they remember all the glory and the success that you had on the field, but a whole lot of things were happening off the field. And that is really the basis of a lot of what happens in this book, Vance. And I want to start in real quick. And if you could tell everybody here a little bit more about, your childhood and your family, your parents and your dad in particular, and how growing up, because of what was happening at home, what it led you to do to want to be the best you could be off, out of the home.
Well, and interesting enough, and the reason why when I travel the country and share my testimony with the youth, especially, I always show the highlights, because a lot of them want to be famous when they grow up. And that's what I felt like when I was a kid too. So there's a purpose for me showing them that, so I can show them how actually your identity is not in achieving an identity. Because to me, an identity is received. And I didn't understand that back when I was a kid, because growing up as a kid, it was about achieving an identity, thinking somehow if I made myself famous. And you had told everyone, I think that I'm originally from New Jersey, and how it came about being born in New Jersey is my father was born in New Jersey, and he was one of 6 siblings. And my father, unfortunately, when my dad was just a child, his dad had gotten killed on the railroad tracks because he was a part of they were building railroad tracks back in those days. And my dad grew up without a father. So my dad didn't do sports. My dad didn't even finish junior high school or high school. He actually got involved in a gang. And that's even to this very day, a lot of minorities are just involved in gangs killing each other. I'm talking on a daily basis, guys, because I still talk to my family members out there. And unfortunately, my father, when he was a part of that gang, he ended up actually having to face a lot of prison time because the gang members were killing each other. And he was forced back in I think it was the 50s. Yeah, back in the late 50s, actually, to make a choice to either join the service or go to prison. And that's when he opted to join the service. And they sent him down to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where he was part of the Army. And then growing up as a kid, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about where I was born at, because I was born in Trenton. Yeah. My father, I'm sorry, when he was down here in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, my father actually, when he was 20 years old, had a chance to, after about several months, go out off campus. And then he went to a concert. And I think some of the people listening remember the name James Brown. My dad goes to a James Brown concert here in Arizona, and he sees a young lady sitting inside of a car and knocks on the window and asks, "Why aren't you inside the concert?" And she says, "I'm only 15 years old and they're selling alcohol, so I'm not old enough to go inside." So he stays outside and talks to this 15-year-old girl. And so when I travel the country and I talk to high school kids, especially, I say, "Hey, girls, raise your hand if you're 15 years old." And they'll raise their hand. And I say, "Don't you talk to no 20-year-old boys." And I'm going to tell you the reason why. Because my father went to this high school where this girl was a sophomore, and he got on his knees and proposed to a 15-year-old little girl. And she said, "Well, I'll marry you, but I have to ask my daddy." And that's how they said it back then. Diddy, they didn't say daddy. Anyway, went back out to the cotton gin yard in Marana, Arizona, and asked the father of that 15-year-old, and he said, yes, you can marry my daughter. And so she got pregnant, and so he didn't have to go to Vietnam because he was supposed to go to Vietnam, but since he had a minor pregnant, they said, okay, you don't have to go to Vietnam. And so that's how they got back out to New Jersey. And then guess who was inside of her belly? I was. So I was born 9 months later. Now I'm not sure how far you want me to go to that part of my testimony, but unfortunately, you know, my dad went back to his old ways. My mom ended up taking me and going back to Tucson, Arizona. And he actually went back out to Tucson and kidnapped both of us and brought us back to New Jersey. And 9 months later, my sister was born. And it got so hard for my mother because my dad, living in the same place where they were selling drugs, using drugs, drinking, and being violent, my mom said, if you want to be with me and these kids, you got to come back out to Arizona with us. Otherwise, we're leaving you here. And that's when he decided, I love my family. I'm going to go out to Arizona with you. And that's how I came about growing up here in Tucson, Arizona, which, by the way, I've been gone for 30 years. And I just got 33 years. I just got back here this year for the first time in 33 years.
Wow. That's amazing. And we're gonna talk about that in a few minutes. But so, you know, because of that, but you were now in Tucson with your family, with your dad and so forth. Tell me a little bit about what home life was like back then.
Well, there's a saying, you can take the brother out of Jersey. Yep, but you can't take Jersey out the brother. So my father pretty much just starts hitting the streets here in Tucson, Arizona. And he wasn't necessarily involved with the gang, but he was involved with some people that were selling and using drugs. And the other thing he starts to do is really be abusive to my mother. And now here my sister and I are witnessing the abuse. And it got so hard for us that we would just literally be at a point where we want to just jump out the car. I had planned on even going up to Mount Lemmon here in Tucson, Arizona, and just committing suicide when I was a kid because I hated my father. And watching a father beat on a mother every single day, it's really traumatizing for a kid. I even ran away from home a couple of times. One time I ran down to Tucson, Arizona, and I ended up being homeless down there for a few days. And my dad and mom were looking for me. And for some reason, they drove through downtown and they saw me. And my dad said, son, we've been looking all over the place for you. You hungry? I said, yes. He said, well, you know where you live at. And my dad rolls the window back up and drives back up. I won't get too deep into that part of the story. So, guys, the only time I had any joy or happiness inside of me was when I would watch television. And what I watched on television was sports. And I fell in love because I saw all these athletes that were making touchdowns and hitting home runs with baseball and soccer, kicking the ball into the goal. And I was just like, man, I just would love to be famous one day. And so eventually it got to a point where my father saw how much I liked sports that he actually became my coach in football and flag football. And I also played soccer, baseball, did all different types of sports. And the one good thing I will say about my dad as a child, he always made me go to bed at 8:30 every night. But before I had to go to bed, he made sure that I would run at least 20 minutes to an hour. Every single night he made me run before I could even come back in the house because he wanted me to be able to compete against my teammates and be better than them. And then he would make me get up every morning at 5:30 a.m. and he would make me do my push-ups and all different types of workouts. So that's one good thing about my father when I was a child is he always made me do the right thing when it came to that. But whenever I ran away from home and he didn't know what I was doing, I was out there running too, unfortunately. Well, actually, fortunately. But as time went on, guys, I just really started to love athletics and sports so much that I would go to the U of A to even watch ball players play. You guys remember O.J. Simpson? O.J. Simpson was one of the best running backs, right, up in all time NFL history. And so I would watch him, and I saw him come off the field one day when they were playing against the Arizona Wildcats, and I looked up at him, and he looked over at me, and I said, I'm going to grow up and be just like you. And when I get to the rest of my testimony, you're going to find out how I ended up on the same front page my last year in the NFL with O.J. Simpson. So as time goes on, here I am doing sports, and I'm one of the best here in Tucson, Arizona. I get a chance actually to represent the United States of America at the Pan American Games for the Junior Olympics, and I ended up winning the long jump gold medal. So I was really good at track and field as a kid and playing football, flag football. My dad made me play football, tackle football. And I started to really trust my coaches because it got so hard for me at home that I just start calling my coaches dad. And I'll be honest with you guys, in school, I wasn't a good reader. And so I was a cheater. And I used to just do everything I could to try to just make my grades go up by sitting next to somebody that I could just copy off of. So I was not a good student. I was only good at sports back in the day, but I struggled emotionally and mentally. But it was on my way to my identity, like I told you guys I was going to achieve.
Well, so you end up going to U of A, and obviously there, as you mentioned, I mean, you were a star. You were fantastic there. But tell me, when did you, if you don't mind getting into this a little bit, what was your first experience with alcohol, or what got you started with that?
Well, I'll back up. My father was an alcoholic, like I said, and I promised myself when I was a
Right.
kid I was not going to drink. I was not going to do drugs. I wasn't going to
Right.
be a wife beater. But you know what? I did not drink alcohol. I did not do any drugs. One thing I did do is I went to my father's bedroom at sometimes when they would go to work, and I'd look in his closet and I saw a magazine called Hustler. So I had a sexual addiction as a child, all the way down when I was even in my early teens. I would be watching different videos. And so I had a problem in my mind having sex, even though I was a virgin until I was a freshman in college. And I was not even using drugs or alcohol until I made it to the NFL. And let me know when you want to get to that part of my story. But during my college years, I did not do any drugs. I didn't do no alcohol. And in fact, I lost my virginity when I was a freshman in college. And unfortunately, I got 2 girls pregnant my first 2 times out having sex. And I ended up abandoning those kids because, like I told you guys in the very beginning, to me, it was achieving an identity. And their moms and dads said, you need to quit sports and get a job, young man, and marry my daughter so you can raise that child. But I was so self-righteous because it was about being famous that I literally just abandoned those kids even in their childhood. So I get drafted by the Denver Broncos even after my freshman year in college. And you guys can Google this. In 1982, I went to the NCAA championship, and I was actually long jumping against Carl Lewis, who was the number one long jumper in the world at the time, actually for many years. But I ended up actually jumping the whole time. I didn't qualify for the finals. And the night before the finals, they came to my room and said, Mr. Johnson, would you like to jump tomorrow? I said, well, I was placed number 14, so I can't jump tomorrow. They said, yeah, but number 13 place got injured, so you're welcome to jump. And this is my testimony. I said, yes, I'd love to. So I called my mom and said, Mom, I get to jump against Carl Lewis tomorrow in the finals for the long jump. Will you pray for me? Ask God to take away my headache. And she said, son, why don't you get off the phone and ask God to take away your headache and tell me you'll jump for him tomorrow. So the next day, I ended up jumping all day long. And guess what I forgot? And I wonder if anybody on this stream forgot this before. I forgot that I made God a promise that I was going to jump for him. So the last jump of the day was my jump. And here I am, placed still number 12th or 13th. And the promise came back to my mind. And so I said, oh, my God, I made a promise to you. So I said, I'm going to try harder. So I backed up 12 inches. So I was going to try a little fast, run a little faster. And when I got down to the board, I was 12 inches behind the board. So the board is almost 12 inches and I'm 12 inches behind the board and I jump anyway. And I'm not coming down when I'm up in the air. And when I landed, I jumped 26 feet, 11 inches and 3/4. So literally, if you add another 24 inches on there, I'm guessing, what is that? Probably close to 30 feet. So I ended up winning the NCAA championship. And then I came back and was a good football player. So it was all about sports and achieving that identity. And then in 1985, after playing with an amazing quarterback, when I was in college, actually at the East-West Shrine game, Randall Cunningham, he showed me how to play wide receiver because I had never played wide receiver before. And so he told me to follow Jerry Rice. So I followed Jerry Rice and Randall would throw me the ball. And that's how I actually ended up being drafted second pick in the second round, which today there's more NFL teams. So I would have been drafted first round. And that's when I landed in Denver, Colorado. And guys, I promise you, here I am now in my 20s. I had not done any drugs, no alcohol. I had never smoked no cigarettes. I had never done anything except for, like I said, abandoning those 2 kids. And we were playing against the San Francisco 49ers. So any 49er fans out there, you guys are going to love what I'm about to share with you. So we're playing against the 49ers, and all I have to do is catch a punt at the end of the game. I'm standing on the 10-yard line, and the ball's coming down, and I'm thinking, this is the last play of the game. We're winning, so maybe I should just catch the ball with my eyes closed, and then I'll be on the front page of the press. And I thought, no, I'll just catch the ball because it's the last play of the game. I ended up fumbling the ball, and San Francisco won the game. My teammates are screaming and cussing at me from the sideline. Even my coaches were saying, Vance, you're probably going to get cut. And when I got back to Denver, Colorado, on the way to the final cut that day, I stopped by and had my first drink. And I became an alcoholic at day 1. And then when I didn't get cut, the only thing I could think about was how good it made me feel when I would drink alcohol. And then I started smoking weed. I started drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and taking different types of pills because of my injuries. So I was an addict from day 1 in my NFL career.
So I mean, and I don't think your story is necessarily unusual from that perspective. I think many people, unfortunately, that's what happens. They first have that first drink, that first smoke, the first whatever, and they're like, wow, this thing makes me feel either brave or powerful or happy or fun or whatever it is. And it goes from there. But how did that coincide with suddenly now I read this in the book, but I want you to share with everybody. You got your first paycheck. You're now making a lot of money. What were you doing with that money?
I'll tell you exactly what I was doing, but real quick, I need to share something. Just about 3 days ago, guys, I don't know if you guys saw this on the New York Times. See if you guys can see that.
Mm.
This NFL ball player was found dead in his house.
Yeah.
And I did some research because the media wasn't talking about how he died. And I looked at his history, and during his NFL career, they ended up actually kicking him out of the NFL because he actually got kicked out for his use with different types of drugs. And then they brought him back, but then he ended up losing his career. So that kind of proves my point on what happens with athletes after their career. But to get back to your question, and go ahead and ask your question one more time so everyone can hear what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, no, we talked about the the fact that you got this contract, you've now have money in your account, and what were you spending it on?
Well, the first thing that happens, and I haven't shared this very often during my testimony, but you guys are going to hear the truth. So my sign-in bonus, the agent that signed me was from California. He ended up signing me with the Denver Broncos. And for some reason, it was about 2 or 3 months after my career started, I went to my bank account to get some money so I can go buy a Porsche. And I found out that all my money was out of my account. So he had taken all my money. He had purchased property up in Ohio. And then he sold all of the property to some people from China. And so I wasn't able to get my money back, any tax benefits or nothing. So I got ripped off right from the very beginning. So the monies, guys, that I did get, though, in my paycheck, I would go cash and I would get on the airplane and start flying out to Las Vegas to gamble, because that's another thing I learned how to do because my dad was a major gambler as a child when I was a kid. And so I would go to Las Vegas to gamble. I would go to the horse tracks. I would go to the dog tracks. I would do all different types of gambling and just did a lot of things that were just, I didn't grow up the right way. So I didn't have a father that showed me how to save money. I didn't have a father that showed me how to work hard when it came to getting education. So the only thing I wanted to do, guys, was feed my flesh, and feeding my flesh was about it. And feeding my flesh was either meeting girls so that I could have sex with them, gambling, or doing all different types of things off the field, which when people see me on the field, all they saw was the edited version.
Yeah, you're right. And so, it's funny because a lot of people say, well, when you give that kind of money, especially to a young person, and especially to a young person that's surrounded by vices, right? It's a variety of vices. It's a really tough mixture, and this still happens today, Vance. There's so many temptations out there for someone who's a young man like yourself, and I think it really happens in virtually any sport and any situation like that. So, this kind of started to snowball, and even though you're continuing to play, there were instances where you were playing while you were drunk and while you were in a different capacity. Tell me a little bit about how your teammates felt about that.
Well, that's really interesting you said that, because early in my career, some of my teammates would notice when I got to the game that I wasn't the same player that they saw at practice throughout the week. And eventually it got to the point where they would test me, the team would. And so they would have me come 2 to 4 hours early so they could detox me even before the game. And unfortunately, I wouldn't stop drinking anyway because I couldn't wait until after the game to start drinking again. So my teammates actually are the ones who noticed first, a couple of them actually. In fact, I think I remember a couple of the guys specifically who told on me. And that's when they found out that I needed to start getting detoxed. And so, but if you see my highlights, I ran off the alcohol sometimes throughout the first part of the game, and then I'd be making the winning touchdowns. But I struggled even in the games. I would even have some drugs and alcohol waiting in my car for after the games. I struggled off the field, guys. On the field was the only time I had any type of joy, like I said. And it was about making touchdowns, and that's why when you saw me throwing my hands up, I wanted people to just be proud and happy about Vance Johnson. It wasn't even about them. And if you look at some of my highlights, I would be throwing footballs up in the stands, And I would get fined up to $15,000 a game for that, because the Broncos actually, because people would fight over the footballs, would end up suing the Denver Broncos over that. So there was a lot of things I did that were illegal.
No kidding.
Yes, even
Wow.
during my career.
Wow.
And that's how I got the uniform inspector job for the NFL over the last couple of years. So, but that's a whole nother part of my story.
Well, look, so, as time went on, and as you neared the end of your career, and then afterwards, you had lots of struggles. You had lots of marriages and divorces. What was really interesting in the book, you talk about how you'd marry somebody, but the first time you'd get into any sort of a big argument or disagreement, you divorce her, because you didn't want that to carry on and continue, and you wanted to be with someone that you weren't experiencing that with. But I'd like to hear you tell everybody when you feel you really hit the bottom, that rock bottom.
Throughout my career, guys, and like I mentioned that I'd already abandoned my 2 kids. And when I was in the NFL, I actually struggled off the field, like I mentioned to you guys. And even after the Super Bowl, one time I was at home trying to kill myself, and ended up getting a call from my mother. My mom said, "God put you on my mind." And I said, "Mom, you saved my life," because I was going to kill myself. I was literally cutting my wrist. I started to date a lot of women when I was in the NFL. I even actually got married because I got a young lady pregnant that was going to have an abortion, and I begged her not to kill the baby. So we went out to Las Vegas and got married. Cost me $86,000 gambling that night, but $12 to get married. I go back home, and I end up finding out that 3 of my teammates, and I won't mention which guys, but I'm in the shower, and these guys are big, and they ain't just big that way. Anyway, they're having sex. They're screwing my wife. So 3 of my teammates were having sex with my wife, and I got angry. So I ended up getting high. I ran home, and I'm punching on her, and I've already had some domestic violence issues because, again, growing up around a father that was beating on the mom, to me, I was being evil to women that I shouldn't have been evil to, because they were actually doing things to me, like cheating on me and everything, but I was cheating on them first. And I actually threw one of my exes across the bed, and she hit her head against the closet door. And guys, my wife was laying on the ground and she was dead. I literally ran over and was trying to get her to breathe, and I couldn't. I was pushing on her chest. I was blowing air in her lungs, in her mouth, and I carried her in the bathroom and started dumping her head in the toilet. And eventually she starts breathing. And so I was so pissed off at her that I went out and cheated on her and got another woman pregnant. And I eventually had 3 women pregnant at the same time during my NFL career. I had my second wife pregnant that I had married illegally. I had another woman I was having sex with from a strip club that I would see on a daily basis pregnant. And I had another man-wife pregnant that I had cheated with one night. And I'm telling you, my story is just so deep that they're literally even talking to me right now about doing a movie about my life because of the transparency that I have and where it led me to. But I'll just go on and on. But at the end of my career, guys, 10 years in the NFL, just struggling and having so much sin in my life that I decided, just like you guys saw Antonio Brown this past year, run off the field, taking his clothes off and throwing them up in the stands. I just didn't run back on the field. I was supposed to sign another 3-year contract with the Broncos, and I just didn't show back up. And that's when I started to just lean even more. And that's where rock bottom started, because like I said earlier, I thought I was achieving an identity by being famous. But I tell young athletes, it's like climbing to the top of a ladder, thinking when I get to the top, I've achieved my identity. I made it. But the only place to go is where? Down. And athletes, we don't climb back down the ladder. We jump off head first. And that's when I just really struggled even more with my addictions and decided that I was going to try to kill myself several different times because I was nobody famous anymore.
Well, it's interesting. I'll read to everybody the very first line in this book, chapter 1. And it says, Vance Johnson came home from playing in his first Super Bowl and in the dark of his bedroom closet tried to slit his wrists. He was 23 years old and by all appearances seemed to be on the top of the world. No one knew he was depressed, addicted, and desperate mess. And you talk about that being at the top, and now you're at the rock bottom. So, and that's incredible to read, and the rest of the book just continues on with that. But, you talk about you being at rock bottom, but let's talk a little bit about your son, Vaughn, and what happened there and how he became who he became,
Yes.
your why.
So guys, at this time now, I've already gone, I've had 7 wives And one of my first sons, my second oldest son, decided that he wanted to be in his dad's life because I had abandoned all of my kids. So he moved over to the western slope of Colorado to go to college, where I put him in college at. And he kept reaching out to me. And eventually, after a while, I started ignoring him because, like I said, with my addictions and my problems with women, I just didn't want to bother with him anymore. And he reached out and said, "Dad, if you could do me a favor, I need a ride to go see my mom because my grandfather just died of cancer. And if you can play that video, man, if you can show that video, I want to show everybody what happened to my son."
His life was spiraling out of control. And in 2007, a phone call sent him over the edge.
It was about 10:30 in the morning, and my first wife called me, and she said, "Our son is dead." And I was behind the bar in the restaurant, and I said, "What?" She said, "Vaughn is dead. A drunk driver ran a stop sign and killed him." And so I picked up this bottle of Patron, and I just started drinking.
Yep.
I'm sorry, guys, but I always go back whenever especially because NFL Films did this documentary of me. And whenever I watch that, it just takes me back to remembering my son. And when he was a little baby, I saw him a couple of times, but then I didn't see him again until he went to college. And the very night that my son reached out to ask for a ride from his father so that I can go take him to see his mom because his car had broken down, he ended up having to take a motorcycle. And that very night is when he got killed. And in fact, if you have the photo, I don't know if you do or not, of my son, it was on the front page of the Denver Post the next day that my son, Denver Bronco Vance Johnson's son, was killed. I don't know if you had that photo that I sent out to you.
Yeah, I'll pull it up in 1 second.
I kind of just threw it
Yeah,
at
I'll pull
you.
it up 1 second, but yep.
So I really struggled, guys.
And so
while you're looking for that, I'm going to show you. This is one of my accidental times trying to kill myself right here, if you guys can see that. They literally had to cut my arm open because they were going to chop it off and took part of my leg so they could fix the different veins and different parts of the things that were shutting down inside of my arm. I was really I struggled after my career. And if it wasn't for the different times that I would get actually taken to the hospital, that's the article right there. And I think it even shows the date. Yeah, that was back in 2007.
September 10th, 2007. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was my son. And I'm going to share this with you guys. I don't tell the youth or the people necessarily that I share around the country this part, but it was several years after my son died that I got reached out to on social media, and a lady sent over a photo of a guy who looked just like my son. And so that was his biological son, because remember I told you my ex was cheating on me with my teammates. That was the same woman, but she ended up he wasn't my biological son, but guess what? He died my son. And to this day, he's my son. And so it just really breaks my heart, the type of guy I was, because I abandoned all my kids. The majority of my younger kids that I abandoned were being sexually molested. Even the two here in Arizona, which I just recently reunited with this here in 2022. So my story, guys, it goes on and on. It doesn't end. And that's the reason why I lived the life that I lived, because of the testimony that I have now, to go around and just share the hope. And I'll get into that part of how this ended up happening after I show you how far rock bottom really went.
Do you want me to share that video of you in the hospital?
Yeah. So what ended up happening, guys? I called my mom one night and told her, because I had tried to kill myself several times, and I told my mom I was going to die, and she ended up actually racing to pick me up at the hospital. And if you can show that video to show you what happened.
Literally for 2 years, I used myself into a coma. It was probably the lowest of my life.
Yeah.
So I ended up actually being put in an ambulance, and they raced me to another hospital, and they had to induce me into a coma. And on day 24 of my 28-day coma, they told all my family to please come out and say goodbye to Vance. And so what they did was they took all whatever they have on you when you're in that induced coma, and they propped me up, put the oxygen in my nose and the different wires on me so that my family can come out and even take deathbed pictures of me. They called all of my kids. I had 7 kids at the time. Well, one of my sons was dead, so only 6 of them was on a conference call. And all my kids told the doctors, we hate them, just let them die. And to this day, I thank them whenever I reunite with my kids, which I have. and said that he needed to die. So I really appreciate you guys not even coming out to say goodbye to him because he needed to die. Well, my mom tells the doctor when everyone's saying goodbye to me that, you know what, God's not done with my son. My son's not going to die. And every single body there was like, your son is going to die. Well, on day 28, my eyes opened. And I asked the doctors and I asked my mom and dad, did this ex-wife come and this ex-wife come? One of them came to say goodbye to me. The other one came and she was angry at me, glad that I was dying. And everyone looked at me like, Mr. Johnson, you were in a coma, but those 2 out of your 7 ex-wives came. And then I said, well, did another guy, so-and-so, pastor, so-and-so pray over me and another pastor? And everyone was looking at me like I was crazy. And they said, those 2 pastors and those 2 names came and prayed over you, Mr. Johnson. You never met them before. How did you know they were there? Guys, that's when I tell everyone there's a spirit inside of us. The spirit inside of me saw those 2 ex-wives and those 2 pastors praying over me. And then one nurse came in there one day and was like, Mr. Johnson, are you hungry? Because you've been in this bed for a long time. I said, I actually was upstairs and I was asking people how to get back to my room, man, but nobody would tell me how to get back to my room. And I kept tapping on people's shoulders, but they wouldn't even respond to me. And she said, sir, it's because you haven't been out of that bed. And I told her what was upstairs. And she said, her eyes just blew up. And she said, that's up there, but you haven't been out of that bed, Mr. Johnson. So here I am, guys, now, literally realizing, well, and I didn't until years later, that the spirit inside of me, I even saw the demons that used to possess me coming in those rooms throughout the day, but then they would just turn around and leave. And that's when I started realizing I'm struggling. Something's wrong with me. And even after I left the hospital, it only took about several months before I ended up relapsing again. And finally, I was just screaming and crying to God to help me one day when I was driving through a canyon. And then all of a sudden, I get a call from the NFL. And I'm like, why are you guys calling me? They said, well, we got reached out to by your ex-wife, and I won't mention her name. And they said, I said, well, listen, I've been divorced now, coming up on a year. What are you talking about? And they said, well, she said, though, that she felt like you were struggling and that you needed some help. And I said, I do need help. And I told them that I was struggling with my addiction. And then a former Tampa Bay Buccaneer by the name of Randy Grimes, you guys are welcome to Google him because he's the one that ended up reaching out to me and doing an intervention. And so that's when I got on an airplane and flew out to Florida to go get help. So now I'm out here in Florida in treatment, and I'm one of 9 NFL ball players out there in treatment out of 450 clients that were at that treatment program. And at day 13, when I got detoxed, I was ready to leave. And this is where my testimony gets really deep. I was standing at the front gate thinking about how whether I should climb the fence or call my mother because I don't want to stay here anymore. And I don't want to be around all these so-and-sos because they're not like me. I'm famous. I heard a voice inside of my head that said, go back in and listen. And all of a sudden I go look across the street, and this is the truth. And I even Googled it just to even prove it to myself. But there is a church across the street with a cross on top. And I knew God was telling me to go back in and listen. And that's when I started to meet and talk with my therapist. And one of my therapists actually worked so hard with me. And I think this is one of your questions actually that you're going to have for me. She literally asked me, what would you tell your son if you were able to talk to him at his gravesite? And you know what I said to her? And this is actually in my book too. I said, I would tell my son that I'm never going back to the old me, and I'm going to stay sober for him for the rest of my life. I literally felt that I was talking to my son because she even made me lay on the ground and pretend like I was him looking up. And then she made me stand up and look down and had another guy lay on the ground and look up at me to pretend like he was my son that was in his grave. I mean, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, guys. And it's all in my book. And that's the reason why I'm just so transparent. And then I started opening up a recovery Bible and I start reading different scriptures. And I got to share this. The first scripture I ever read in my life was Proverbs 14:12, where it says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but his pathway is the leads to death. So the very thing I said I was going to do since I was a child that was leading me to the right path, I actually ended up in my deathbed. And I forgot to tell you guys this part, but in the newspaper, O.J. Simpson, what ended up happening to him? Does anyone know? Do you know what ended up happening to him? What did he do? He murdered his wife, right?
Pretty confident.
I was on the front page admitting my domestic violence the same time he was being accused of murder. And by God's grace, Oprah Winfrey ended up reaching out to me and had me come out to talk on her show. And so I apologized in front of 9 million people watching that show to my ex-wife that she ended up flying out secretly so that she could bring her on stage. And you guys can go watch this too. My ex, I didn't even know was there, but she wouldn't come out on stage because she didn't want to forgive me in front of everyone. In fact, Oprah went to the back and interviewed her, and she said, no, I don't forgive him. But guess what? Me being the man of God now, we're supposed to love everybody, even our enemy. And so I forgive her for not even forgiving me, because it was really Vance Johnson's fault. It wasn't her fault. As time goes on, guys, when I was in treatment, I just started to really learn a lot and just lean on scripture. I know there are many roads to recovery, but when I saw that Jesus Christ nailed all my sins and addictions to the cross, and I needed to repent and just cry out that he was going to be the way that I was going to walk in my recovery. And that's why I really encourage people to go to Celebrate Recovery wherever they are all over the country, so that they can be a part of a recovering community.
Tell me a little bit about, you were looking at your options coming out of recovery, and you had, you had a couple of options. One of them was to earn just a couple $100 a week staying on at a treatment center, or going to work for the Broncos. What made that decision hard and easy?
Well, that's a really good question, and thank you for that question. Because after I was clean for about a year or so in my recovery, and that took a little time too, guys, because I ended up relapsing a couple small times, but I jumped back on course because I was part of different programs. Well, I moved out to Florida to work at a company, and then the Broncos reached out to me and said, we want to fly you back here to Colorado, Vance, because you're Vance Johnson. So I flew back out, and they had talked to me about possibly me working with them and doing some certain things out there in the city of Colorado, the state of Colorado. And they said, Mr. Johnson, we want you to come down and stand in the middle of the field at halftime, and we're going to have all the crowd cheer for you. And I said, okay, send me a text and let me know when to show up there, okay? And they said, okay. And guess what I did after I told them that? I went to the airport and sat there for 6 hours to wait for my flight, because I didn't want to go back to being famous again. Because you know what I would do with the women that I met inside the Denver Broncos stadium? Well, you already know. And I said, I need to say no to myself. And so I had to deny the opportunity to be successful and famous again, because then I would lean back on my addictions and my sexual things that I did too, which I also started to read that was a sin. And I got on the plane and flew back out to Florida. I pretty much was homeless working at the company I worked for, because I didn't make very much money, but they gave me some housing down the alley, and I catch a bus to work every week. And then I started just to make a promise to God that the rest of my life, all I want to do is not be famous again, but just use the very platform that I fell off of to show people there's a way out of the addictions and the bondage of even mental illness that we suffer with. So my story goes deeper and deeper. And even God's word says, because of my CTE and the things I struggle with, and I found out that even when I die, they said, if you donate your brain, Vance, we'll give your family up to X amount of $1 million. And I'm going to be doing that too. But the Bible says, don't lean on your own understanding, but every word of God. And so that's why all through my book, I just share scripture and show people that there's a way.
This is all fantastic. Before we go any further, Shirley just posted in the chat box a link to get a copy of Vance's book. I highly encourage you all to certainly get your copy. But before, just a couple more questions. One of them is, you mentioned in your book, you talk about taking a daily inventory. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different levels of taking a daily inventory. But again, this basically scriptural, because we're supposed to examine ourselves daily. And that's the reason why, even when I go to bed, or especially when I wake up in the morning, what is the first thing that I do? Well, the first thing that I do is examine myself and see where I am in my walk, and see the things and the promises that I've made in the past. I examine myself by seeing how I feel in my flesh. And even though I struggle sometimes, even to this day, in the mornings with my emotions and my feelings, I just want to believe in scripture where it says, you don't walk by your feelings, you walk by, by sight. And really, I call that feelings. I don't walk by feelings, I walk by faith. Scripture says you don't walk by sight, you walk by faith. To me, when you see things, that gives you feelings. I don't walk by my feelings anymore. And so I always look forward to the trials and the tribulations, the struggles that I go through, so I can let people know that you can actually endure those things by avoiding and by just blocking yourself from the things that you used to do to try to make yourself feel better, because it's only going to last for a short time. It goes on and on, guys. So I don't want to get too much deeper than that, but it doesn't stop there.
No, that's great. And look, everybody can get a lot of this, obviously, from your book. But I guess one thing I'd like to hear from you right now, if you could, is, a good friend of mine I know is going through struggles with alcohol and so forth. And I'm sure we all have people in our lives that we may know, or friends or family, that are struggling with some form of addiction. And and abuse and so forth. What is something you would recommend that, is there anything we can do to help, or is it such a challenge to do that? I mean, what can we do?
Well, there are a number of things we can do. The number one thing we do is we don't give up. Now, I will say, if you guys have any loved ones that are still dealing with an addiction, don't support the addiction. And I tell moms that this is my job. I'm the ambassador at America's Rehab Campuses. And what I do is get people into treatment on a daily basis. And I don't care where people are in the country. And even if you have loved ones that are struggling, you can reach out to me and I'd love to help that loved one. But don't support the addiction, but let that child know or that loved one know, when you're ready to get help, I'm going to be here for you. And the other thing you can do is just really look in the area for different types of programs, or is that loved one suffering with mental illness or what types of addictions? So you can do some research to see what's going to be the best fit for them. And I don't know if you guys know, but I've actually recently they aired it, but I did an intervention on the show A&E with a young lady that was selling her body for sex. The very thing I used to go buy in Las Vegas, A&E hired me to do an intervention on that young lady. But I just want loved ones to just never give up on their loved ones and the people that are struggling with addictions, because even to this day, just over the last couple of days, there was a homeless lady that was up here in the foothills. She's Indian, but she had the right insurance, access insurance, that we got into a program. And there was a homeless young man that I went to go visit his family to talk about him, and ended up meeting with him about 3 months ago, but I did not give up on him. And he actually checked into treatment just yesterday too. So you just never give up. And love the addict, but hate the addiction. Always love the addict, but hate the addiction, and never support that addiction either. And that's why if people ever want to reach out to me, I'll do whatever I can to support them to get their loved ones into treatment.
That's amazing. And speaking of that, Vance, what is the best way to?
Real quick, my book. If anybody wants me to sign the book, and I'll do it for free. If you purchase the book and you want to mail it out to me, I'll sign it for free. And you just have to pay for the mailing, but I don't want to have to make any money off of a signature.
Can't you just fly to me and sign it in person?
No, you can fly me out and I'll sign it in person.
Come to New York.
Anyway, well,
listen,
I fly all over the country speaking, so if they fly me out that way, I'll sign it for you.
There you go. Perfect.
You don't even have to pay for the Uber.
You've been fantastic, Vance. Come on, I'll come pick you up. But anyways, what is the best way for someone to be able to get a hold of you?
The best way is I have a website, vanceinspires.org, vanceinspires.org, and you can actually email me and reach out to me that way. There's also that treatment option that's on there too, because I'm the ambassador at America's Rehab Campuses here in Tucson, Arizona. And I would love people to just reach out to me, because I'm pretty transparent, and I love even talking to people on social media and everything. But again, if you go to vanceinspires.org and email me there, if you have a loved one that you need to get into treatment, I'd be willing to even do an intervention and get them into treatment with me. And if they come to my treatment program, I won't even charge you for the intervention. And if you know some people that need loved ones that are needing to get into help, just have them reach out to me. And again, I'm the ambassador at America's Rehab Campuses, which, like I said, I just got back for the first time after 30 years here in Tucson, Arizona with my elderly parents. And I'm at one of the top treatment programs in the country. It's called America's Rehab Campuses right here in Tucson, Arizona. I call it the Ark, just like Noah's Ark.
I got to tell you, this has been a fan. I've done over 90 of these events, Vance, and I've had some very compelling guests, but this has been a fantastic conversation. It's interesting when you say, Vance inspires, and it's true. And I just put in the chat there, vanceinspires.org. That's the site to check out, everybody. But thank you so much for sharing it. When you say you're transparent, you're about as transparent as it gets. And being a New Yorker, we appreciate no BS. We appreciate being very upfront and very direct, and that's certainly you. You call it like it is, and you follow it up, and I really appreciate that. And truly, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time and of course your story, and I can see how it's having an impact on everybody who's hearing it.
Well, it's just an honor meeting all of you, especially early on when I had a chance to go to the different tables to meet you guys individually. And I just love you guys so much. And I just give God praise that I had this opportunity. And Jesus Christ nailed all my sins and addictions to the cross. And so I just love to share the hope in Jesus with everybody, man. And if you guys need me, please reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vance. I really appreciate everything.